South China Morning Post, 22nd of February 2024, according to a U.S. official, China attempts to disrupt global stability even as it gains from it. The United States established globalization to gain allies in the conflict with Russia. China has emerged as the new communist superpower, undermining the international order. According to a senior U.S. State Department official on Wednesday, China has the best of both worlds, profiting from the international stability the U.S. has promoted while undermining it where it serves its interests. The People's Republic of China and the U.S. are vying for influence among developing nations in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, according to remarks made by Daniel Kritenbrink, Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, at the opening of a two-day Atlantic Council conference on China and the Global South. The international order offers opportunities and stability, which have benefited the People's Republic of China. However, rather than strengthening these ideals, the PRC regrettably frequently takes acts that do the opposite, Kritenbrink said, noting Beijing's expansion into the South China Sea, its economic pressure on smaller governments, and its initiatives to oppose universal human rights. He told the conference, the PRC has become more regressive abroad and repressive at home. The PRC is advancing an alternative vision for global governance. However, some panelists, including those from developing nations, pushed back, claiming that while the struggle for influence is typically portrayed as a simple binary decision between Beijing and Washington, the truth is more complex. According to Bilahari Kaushik, chairman of the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore, the developing world conceals a multiplicity of interests. We are concerned about some aspects of American behavior as well as some aspects of Chinese behavior. According to Kritenbrink, the U.S. strategy toward the Global South is neither predicated on opposing China nor does it compel nations to make a decision. Instead, he argued, it advances the idea of a world where institutions, rules, and conventions prevail over antiquated and dangerous concepts of might making right. But it would be naive to think that we do not consider China. Former U.S. Ambassador to Vietnam Kritenbrink stated, of course, we can't deny that strategic competition is also a critical part of this moment. We are engaged in fierce strategic competition with the PRC. On the other hand, the U.S. is dedicated to conducting this competition sensibly to prevent miscalculation or conflict. The Global Development, Security, Civilization, and Belt and Road Initiatives, the four main pillars of China's outreach, were criticized by Kritenbrink for undermining environmental and collective defense standards and attempting to recast human rights as a Western prerogative. Conference panelists noted that Global South has connotations and should not be used to favor the now discredited Third World. Even while Beijing and Washington compete for their allegiance and UN votes, the countries centered in the Southern Hemisphere frequently have nothing in common but a vague sense that the global North is overly dominating. No matter how bitter these nations may be about certain facets of Western policy, Kaushik argued, it doesn't mean that these countries are going to drink deeply of Chinese Kool-Aid. However, he continued, China avoids what I will call sanctimonious diplomacy, insisting that its interpretation of values is the only possible interpretation and understands the mood that constitutes the Global South better than the West. According to panelists, Beijing's focus on the Global South is expected to change in light of China's recent economic slowdown, exacerbated by a property crisis, rising youth unemployment, damaged confidence, and collapsing financial markets. China has been decreasing its investment in Belt and Road Initiative projects since 2015. According to observers, the country's weakening economy will also cause it to concentrate more on less costly initiatives like joint defense exercises, increased training of foreign militaries, telecommunications infrastructure projects, and the employment of the People's Liberation Army for quasi-political outreach abroad. According to Nader Aland, a China fellow at the National Bureau of Asian Research, because Chinese feel more cornered in a way. With reduced options, it's going to use more diversity of tools for influence that is cheaper than just investing in big infrastructure projects. However, Beijing will continue to focus on opposing the US. It's not as though these nations are Beijing's pawns, but Beijing perceives them as such, and as a result, it's a very binary vision of the rejection of the current order. According to Paul Nantulia, a research associate for African Studies at the U.S. National Defense University, China's adaptable strategies are evident in Africa. The Chinese educate more African officers than any other industrialized nation. And that's when this gets crucial, he stated. I don't believe the Chinese government combines all its resources into one entity. According to Kritenbrink, Washington is still focused on persuading developing nations, not arm-twisting them, with revitalized alliances, financing initiatives and ties involving the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Summit for Democracy, U.S. Pacific Island Country Summit, and Africa outreach programs, even as the stakes and rhetoric between the two largest economies in the world rise. He declared, "We don't want nations to have to choose between the PRC and us. However, we want to support their right to choose and their ability to make decisions without being coerced by Chinese communists."